All right, I'd like to introduce the next panel, and it's a bittersweet experience because this is our final panel of the seminar, and I just want to take this time to thank again the committee that pulled together such a wonderful event and brought us all here to Washington, D.C. to speak about the most important new directions in academic publishing. So one more round of applause for the fantastic committee that put everything together. Thank you all for everything. And without further ado, I would like to make sure to introduce the closing panel. We are so lucky to have a group of brilliant women that are here today from the Scholarly Kitchen, and they will be speaking to the future of independent and society publishers, which fits beautifully in line with the theme of New Directions. We're talking about New Directions in a lot of different aspects, and it's fantastic to have this closing ceremony to synthesize a lot of the important discussion points that were brought to light over this past day and a half. And without further ado, I will hand things over to Ann Cochran to moderate the session. But one more thing. I want to thank Mary Beth Barilla personally, not only for shepherding the committee to make sure that this was a successful seminar, but also for bringing together the chefs today. So thank you all very much, and please welcome the panel.
All right. Thank you, thank you. So this has been a great meeting, right? I've learned so much in the last 2 days, day and a half. So my thanks as well to the committee. My name is Angela Cochran. I am the current president of SSP. I'm the managing director and publisher at the American Society of Civil Engineers and the deputy editor of the Scholarly Kitchen. And I am absolutely thrilled to be here today. So we take this show on the road, this Scholarly Kitchen Live thing, international actually. We do the 2 webinars with SSP every year. We go to the annual meeting and have a plenary session with the chefs. We have a panel at Charleston, at the Frankfurt Book Fair, pretty much mostly anywhere people want to stick those of us who contribute to the blog on a stage to talk, because that's what we like to do. But I think this is the first time we've ever had an all-female chef panel. So we're gonna rebrand this the executive chef panel. So I'm very excited to have my colleagues here today, and maybe we can briefly just pick up the mic and introduce who you are.
Hi, I'm Ann Michael, Chief Digital Officer at the Public Library of Science.
Lisa Janicki Hinchliff. I'm the coordinator for Information Literacy Services and Instruction at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, and also a faculty member.
I'm Judy Luther, president and founder of Informed Strategies. We work with all stakeholders in the library information publishing space.
I've heard that the microphone requires a certain level of care, right? You have to have it at a certain closeness, but a certain distance, right? I'm Karen Wolf. I'm the executive director of the Omohundro Institute of Early American History and Culture, which is a funder, publisher, and convener in early American history, and I'm also a professor of history at William & Mary.
Great, thank you. So we wanted to focus on, kind of looking at the theme of the future of scholarly publishing, which, is meaty enough as it is, but focusing on independent and society publishers. And I'm going to ask my colleagues here really complicated, deep questions and ask them to answer them as briefly as possible. So, so it's completely unfair starting from the get-go. But I want to start with a question for Lisa. So, Lisa, it's felt like for the last several years we've been playing this game of chicken between librarians and publishers over business models, right? So everybody sort of nods their head and says, yeah, sure, we need a new business model, but nobody's kind of been willing to stick their neck out on something new. And now with transformative agreements and some of the other deals that we've been hearing about, there seems to be kind of a break in that. are read and publish deals just the big deal? Are we are we looking at something new? So, I'm interested in your opinion on whether these arrangements are a step in the right direction, and is there also, in keeping with our theme on society and independent publishers, is there a desire from librarians to engage not just with the big commercial publishers on these new kinds of deals, but with all of us? Recognizing you do not represent the entire library.
Yeah. Last week I was on a panel at a different conference that it just like every publisher was listed as their independent like publishing company, and then it said the library perspective, Lisa Hinchliffe. I was like, oh, okay. So I think it's an interesting thing. One of the things that I've really been sitting here thinking about a lot during this program and other recent presentations, webinars, et cetera, it's very common these days. You'll hear people say like, oh, that's a resource. It's not pie. Everyone can benefit, right? It's not an exclusionary good. So it turns out the library budget is pie. There are only so many pieces in it. And so the question for librarians is, what do we do with limited resources, not what do we do with infinite resources? Which is not to say that we can't advocate for more resources and make the case, et cetera, but in any given year, it's a limited resource. So one of the things that I think librarians have started to recognize is that more strategic and active managing of that resource can be a way of shaping scholarship, publishing, relationships with publishers, with platforms, et cetera, in ways that we think would be beneficial to our ultimate mission, which is a tricky one for us because individually, say at our campuses, and I think in most cases we're talking primarily academic and research librarians in this sphere, less the public libraries. There's a few exceptions to that for sure. We have a mission to serve the particular user community on our campus and our institution, and the question is, what best does that? But we also have this collective responsibility to figuring out collectively as well, how do we have a healthy ecosystem of libraries as well as scholarship sharing? So we are really going through a time, I think, of asking some of the same questions what were asked of the panel that we just heard, which is, geez, this internet thing, it changed stuff. This AI thing kind of changed stuff. What does that carrying out that mission look like in this environment? Certainly, it does seem like it's changed some of the agreements that we're looking at. I will say that, the talk I gave just 2 weeks ago at the Health Sciences Librarians of Illinois was that, this is just the new big deal. And big deals worry me as a librarian. They weren't such a great deal for us, it turns out, the last time around. And they definitely weren't a great deal for independent publishers. It definitely drove independent publishers to partnerships with larger publishers. Now, that may have also had some good benefits with it. It's not a zero, it's an all negative, all positive kind of thing. But I think that transformative agreements, which are another big deal, and in fact, they're getting bigger and bigger, right? Whole countries, and you probably saw the outgoing European commissioner reported in Times Higher Ed yesterday that he would like to see the entire European Union negotiate with, say, Elsevier, Springer Nature, or Wiley, not just Germany, but like the whole EU. Okay, so that looks to me like further consolidation. And then I'm not entirely confident that that is good for libraries, scholars. It's certainly not good for the idea of independent publishers and potentially for smaller societies. It is almost impossible for us to think about negotiating transformative agreements on the small level. Anyone who's at a small society already knows we, by and large, don't pay much attention to you. And I don't mean that because we don't like you. I mean that because also our time is limited and scale matters. Okay, I should stop talking.
Awesome. Well, I have another kind of follow-up for you. Yesterday was the first time I had kind of heard the term collective action model. And when we're talking about open access journals or publishers in particular, do you think that libraries will be able to justify paying open access publishers a membership or subscription fee just to sort of support the endeavor?
So there's a two-part question, a two-part answer to that. One is we know they can justify it because they are, in some cases, already doing so. So the Open Library of the Humanities, for example, Martin Paul Eves project, it appears that annual reviews subscribe to Open is going to succeed, though we don't actually know yet. What I don't know, and I'm actually rather skeptical about, is the scalability of that model. So there's definitely probably some first mover advantage. So not good for you if you aren't already moving. There's also just the question of sort of like at what price and how big the community has to be to make that happen. One of the things that and what things it can work for versus won't work for. But the biggest thing is I can't imagine that being a successful model for the entire industry. Or even, honestly, a very large portion of the industry. Because as one-off projects that we justify at small price points, you know, every librarian has some discretion in their budget. But if you take the University of Illinois serials budget and then convert it all to, well, we're just supporting the open infrastructure, I think we're going to have a lot more questions around, wait, maybe we don't need to give the library that much money then.
Yeah, yeah. That's definitely a concern. And yesterday there was some fascinating information that Sarah shared from PLOS about what you guys are thinking about as far as new business models that may be shifting away from the APC model. What do you think the future of the APC model is looking like?
So I'm going to take a little bit of license, and before I answer that, I want to comment on something that Lisa said.
Sure.
So one of the things through, over a decade of work in consulting, and also through creating the open access data tool that we have, is we can definitely confirm without a shadow of a doubt how much concentration there is with the large publishers. We've even done independent studies with some consortia where 90%, potentially, 85, 90% of their activity is with the top 10 or 15 publishers. So just to underline your point, that makes it really harder for the small guys to get people's attention. So I just wanted to give you data to back you up. So beyond the APC, that's been something we've been thinking about a long time. And I think one of the things that's really clear is that there's not going to be, one model to rule them all. This isn't Highlander. It's not going to be that one thing survives. And so I think when you think about subscription, as a model for toll access, when you think about open access and APC based, when you think about collective action models and things that perhaps we haven't even thought about yet, I think it's really clear that we are going to absolutely require a mixed portfolio of business models to support the diversity and the breadth of the content that we have now. There's just no other way around it. So the way I like to look at it is, will we see less APC-funded journals? Absolutely, because that's all the open access journals are now for the most part. I mean, honestly, most of them. And there certainly are some that are not that. There's platinum, there's some other models, but most are gold open access, APC based. At PLOS, as Sarah said, we're really looking into collective action and collective funding models. And one of the big problems, I think, that early on, maybe some very zealous OA advocates, didn't really dig into was that, they said, here's how much money is in the system. And if we take this money from toll access and we move it over to open access, we could cover everything. But what no one really emphasized was the fact how much of that money in an APC model goes away. So everything that's based on readership, including corporate entities, all that money goes away. So I think collective action is one way to try to get some of that money back into the ecosystem, and I think it's absolutely going to have to happen. What the ultimate percentages are of each model, I have no idea what that would be, but I can guarantee you that there's going to be diversity.
Definitely something to keep an eye on and see how it develops going forward. We are finding that our users are going to different places to find content, where we have Web of Science and Scopus now competing with ResearchGate and other entities to get eyeballs onto the content. And the big question that's been coming up at different panels is about, will publishers at some point feel comfortable putting their full text someplace else? We've spent so much time making our pages sticky, but is that actually not what our users are looking for? They'd rather get our full text content where they prefer to see it. This is something, Judy, that you have been thinking about and looking at. So what trends are you watching in this space?
In keeping with the OA theme, first of all, the publishers who are comfortable letting their content travel is clearly going to be more limited to the ones who already have considered their content as open in terms of economic models. I think there are a really large set of access issues that were very apparent to the corporate market, and the efforts to make them apparent in the library market. The first stab at that, because it was funded by Elsevier and other large corporate publishers and not really well recognized in the library space, are actually underrepresenting a significant amount of use because the end users' lack of access never really registers in the library. They're off campus most of the time. They're in a coffee shop. They're off the campus network. When they can't have access, they go elsewhere. Sci-Hub and a host of other places. So solving that access problem, and there's the NISO has organized the Coalition for Seamless Access, which is a collaborative effort on the part of publishers, libraries, vendors to solve this issue. And it's shibboleth, basically, cleaned up and streamlined to help solve this access problem. So I think over time, and yesterday, Heather, you mentioned that Counter is going to release a model that will allow publishers to track that usage wherever it occurs. And I think that's a significant step forward in terms of actually being able to document where users are going for their content and to serve them in the ways that they can best access the content.
Karen, do we have the same kind of user behavior in the humanities? Where do humanities scholars find content?
Since I'm far enough away from you, Angela, you don't have the hook, so I'm going to just take 1 minute to talk about research in the humanities, and particularly in history, and how it actually functions so differently and why it is that our users behave differently. Because one thing that's important to know is that for advanced humanities research, our communities are simply much smaller. They're much smaller groups, but that does not make them any less important. And the problems of humanities research are actually problems for humanity. So let me make one quick point about, for example, there's been a lot of recent public attention to the treatment of slavery on plantation tours in North America. Those plantation tours that are now deeply engaged in excavating and illustrating the life of enslaved people are dependent on decades worth of research that historians have been doing that's based on digitization in some part, but also some non-digitized deep research in local archives. For example, the work at Mount Vernon to illustrate that George Washington is one man surrounded by hundreds of people who lived and worked at Mount Vernon is based on work in local records and the commitment of local officials in Virginia and Maryland to make court records and other local, and yes, I am pulling it down. It's weird because when you pull it down, you can't hear yourself. Yeah. Yeah, okay. This is a very funky microphone. Okay, is that better for you? Okay, all right, good. Anyway, local court records, tax records, and so on. But that research is what makes possible this fresh and real and fuller understanding of the 18th century. That's important actually for all of us as we think about the nature of democracy. So, historians, when they're looking for research information, we're looking at basic databases like JSTOR and Project Muse, where history is published, but we're also looking to our local communities of research, to institutes like mine that hold seminars and colloquia and conferences. So they're not looking for massive and complex databases and sources in quite the same way. There's a lot more detail to be shared there, but I think it's important to emphasize that these small and specific sorts of research communities are just as important to solve problems for and to think about and make sure that we're not actually causing more problems for that research community by trying to solve problems for other communities.
Yeah. I'm going to shift a little bit to talk more about sort of the workflow. This morning there was we had the panel this morning that introduced tools that are available for aiding workflow, for publishers, for end users. And I've been talking to a lot of publishers about workflow efficiencies and where we might be able to streamline what we're doing. And I know this is something near and dear to your heart, Judy. So I'm curious, what parts of the workflow do you see being disrupted or streamlined in a serious way?
We've already seen peer review be disrupted, or a lot of experimentation taking place in that space. Last week, I heard John Inglis, one of the founders of bioRxiv, announce badging for the preprints. So that begins to move further, much further upstream, some of the checking that now takes place and the verification that now takes place within the creation of the version of record. So I see workflow in two areas. One is workflow savings, shorten the time to publication, which is really important to scholars, and lower the cost of publishing. And there's some innovations related to how early in the process the content is turned into XML or HTML for workflow. Right now there's a lot of error that can creep into the system if the author proofs something that's been handed off from the peer review system to the production tracking system where copy editing and layout takes place, and then on to the platform. We're converting it into different file formats. So it's really important I think there's really opportunity there. And there's no one set solution out of the gate in terms of and I've had some interesting discussions with colleagues about XML first and what really defines first. Is it the author's accepted manuscript, or is it the manuscript that the author submitted? Now, outside of that, as we have more types of content that are available to us in digital form beyond the version of record, we now have workflow that is actually less about workflow, our workflow as publishers, and more about the researcher's workflow. So I think we need to kind of redefine how we think about workflow and what we're really tracking there, and all the iterations of a researcher's work, whether it's a poster at a session, a presentation they're giving at a meeting, and their software tools emerging to track that, put a DOI on that, a preprint, a data set, the version of record, which is really publishing as we know it today. And then beyond that, the audio, the video, the podcasts, and all the multimedia, which are emerging as tools for consumption of that content and ways to enable people well beyond the academy to understand and appreciate more of the research being done by researchers.
Yeah, I think we're at a point from a technology standpoint, but also I think maybe from a collaborative standpoint between all the different actors within the scholarly publishing continuum to really be talking about where we can find those efficiencies. So it's kind of an exciting time. Karen, I'm going to ask you to put your society hat on for a moment. And in the midst of sort of all of this change, what opportunities do you see for society publishers going forward?
So obviously I speak as a humanities and history society publisher, but I think the opportunities are in really embracing the kinds of values that are being called for globally. I generally respond negatively to these kind of prescriptions for a kind of whole society publishing change, because I see it's such a diverse world out there. But what I do see as a useful and common thread is this emphasis on values, on openness, for example, and on the significance of community-based work. I think that's incredibly important. And I think that's what society publishers have always brought to the table, essentially. I mean, in my space, these are almost entirely nonprofit publishers. That's what the Humanities is. And these are publishing groups that are really community-based to the extent that our editors are researchers in the field, our manuscript editors are researchers in the field. They're the same people who are sitting around the seminar table when a paper is at its first iteration, who are reading a paper when it is formally submitted to the journal. So community-based, open, and really, a kind of ethical commitment to the value of labor as well as accessibility. So I think that is really a strong pitch that society publishers need to make, that we are actually of the communities that we serve.
Thank you. You're going to have to pass it all the way down to Anne, because I have kind of the same question for you, Anne. And I'm going to ask you to kind of think of it from two different perspectives. So one being, what are the opportunities for an independent publisher, but also what are the opportunities for a completely open access publisher? Now that PLOS doesn't have to fight about why open access is a good thing. They've gotten over sort of that hump and the growing pains of inventing the mega journal. So what are the opportunities ahead for open access publishers?
Actually, that's really interesting. So I guess maybe the first way to start to think about that question is that PLOS was never born to be a publisher. And PLOS kind of became a publisher because it had a model that it wanted to prove was sustainable and could work. So with that being said, just from the perspective of PLOS as an independent, our goal isn't to only be a publisher. So for us, I know we're looking more into open research and open science. We're looking into data. We're looking, just as many people are, into other parts of the research workflow. And our goal is to progress open science, open communications. So what's great about the current environment is you're absolutely correct. I mean, no one's questioning the value of open access anymore, or the fact that it's here to stay. So that's really great. That battle doesn't have to be fought. But for us, I think kind of going back to what Judy was saying, what you were saying about workflow, what we're finding is what our challenge is to think of really new and creative ways to do things that take less time and cost less money, so that we can, meet the and I think it was your post about the downward pressure on pricing, so that we can adjust to that. Because just like you and like everyone else, we have to worry about that. I think I commented on Twitter yesterday that, if we're, with our volume, we're accepting in the low 40 percentages, 43, 44% of our content, that leaves a whole lot of content that we have to do something to that doesn't get published.
Right.
So that's an issue. So what's next for us, and I think what's next for independents, and honestly, I think it's for societies too, is brutal efficiency. That we really need to be,
That might not be the best word on the table.
But quite frankly, I actually stand by that ruthless and brutal efficiency. The market has told us it's not going to tolerate what it doesn't see as value. So we either have to show the value or we have to change the process. And we don't really have a choice. It's just the way things are heading. So that would be one side. On the growth and future perspective, I think that, open access is like this tiny little piece of open science and open research. So we've just started. There's so many opportunities, and what we're getting caught up in, rightfully so, is the fact that this is a huge change for a lot of folks. But for us, it's a huge growing pain, so that we have to now adjust to. And I think independence in general, like when you even think about, the Frontiers and the Hindawis, there are other fully open access publishers out there, MDPI, and they have some advantage because because they have lower cost bases, and they have very diverse portfolios. But they too, I mean, if they're thinking about what's next, if what's next isn't just more of the same, it's all going to be about open research and open science and moving into the researcher life and workflow more extensively than we have.
Karen, do you want to?
On the question of brutal efficiency, I mean, Anne's experience is very different and deeper in a lot of dimensions than mine. But I think what you're saying is that people won't tolerate waste in the system, and that's very different. Then, what I would say is what we say, because we have an 8% acceptance rate for a very small journal, compared to a lot of what you're talking about, but 8% acceptance rate. And what we say is that with 4 to 6 readers it's very typical for us to get a 6-page single-spaced response to a single journal article. So 4 to 6 readers doing that amount of work, 10-page letter from the editor. I'm talking deep content response. What we say is that the process is the product, and that all of the work that comes into our offices is returned with a significant value to the author and actually to the whole research ecosystem, because we share it so that work gets shared back in seminars and workshops and so on. So that is not waste. There is no way that's waste, and there's no way we would cut that out.
So I just want to, Can I? Something in room?
Right back, I promise.
So I mean, I think
Thank you.
one important point to make here, though, is that efficiency is defined by the discipline and by the area. So just because I'm saying brutal efficiency, that doesn't mean some bare bones, horrible process that has no quality. It's efficiency within the parameters of the requirements of the discipline. So, I mean, that seems reasonable to me.
Judy?
To close that point out, I spent an hour with a well-known researcher at the University of California at Davis in food protection, who was sharing with me the importance to her of having her accepted manuscript online, readily available, looking mostly like the finished polished version within an hour of the time that she was notified of its acceptance. Now, there are tools emerging, there's software out there that will take that content and flip it. It has spacing errors in it, the charts don't align, it doesn't look perfect for the print world, but for her purposes, she's well known. People were contacting her 24 hours later and talking about citing her work, which she's already very well cited. But those are the voices that often aren't present in these rooms and these discussions. So when you say brutal, and food protection, I mean, it's like solving the problems with the Zika virus. These are global issues. So, and depending on how far in the science you are, the more important it's going to be.
I am suddenly very glad that civil engineers share more attributes with historians with food science, safety scientists. Okay, so yes, I want to make sure to leave time for questions, and we started a little late. I only cut one question out so far, but I would like to kind of do maybe a rapid, what do you see as significant disruptions or opportunities? What are you watching for? What do you kind of have on your little tickler for, I'm going to read that post today because that's something that I've been watching. So anybody can go ahead and start.
Lisa, you had
I have the mic. See, but this is like a very typical woman thing. Like, I'm like, no, you go first. So, I mean, I think, as a librarian, in many ways, you're observing an industry that, is your supplier, right? I mean, essentially, as well as, your campus is also producing things that come back to you in this way. So I think the biggest things I'm watching are actually within my library space, which is looking at quite a few different models that are emerging related to transformative, but also other kinds of models of where publishers are going as far as thinking about these issues of scale and all those things. But to go back to the sort of topic of this panel per se, with the independent and society publisher and their future, I guess in some ways I feel like the disruption has already occurred. It occurred first with the first big deal. Now it's occurring now with this next big deal. So a disruption that I would love to see is some equal sort of model that lets us, without homogenizing or basically having everyone just contract with a big publisher, right, is models that smaller society publishers or independent publishers might be able to achieve some of the efficiencies of scale and bulk that we need on the library side in order to sort of work with you. So way back in the print world, EBSCO did this for us, right? All those independent society journals, EBSCO as the subscription agent manage that for us. So I think if we can think ahead to what would it looks like to have a subscription agent kind of thing working, perhaps independent societies and smaller societies might be able to sort of play in this transformed world that is looking for these kinds of efficiencies. But I'm not sure how that happens. But at least from my librarian standpoint, that's the disruptor I think that would be kind of exciting to see, is a way that we can continue to engage with the full breadth of the variety and diversity that's been discussed.
So actually, thanks, Lisa, because you gave me time to think. I would say there are three things that I'm personally looking at, and I think PLOS is definitely looking at least two of those. The first is when you talked about alternative revenue models. I think that's really key. That there's a lot of great experimentation going on. There's a lot of talk, not just from us, from lots of folks, about what happens after the APC. How do you make open access even more sustainable and more equitable, so that different parts of the world are able to submit articles without the barrier of an APC, things like that. So that would be one. The other one is a real focus on data and analytics and what we can do to truly understand what's happening in our environment and what the opportunities are. I think that we have a lot of data accessible to us, but we're not all always using it well. And that's because we have to figure out and learn how to ask the right questions, the questions that are going to impact us operationally, the questions that are going to impact our customers, and it contribute to the ecosystem. So just more and more people, what they're doing with data and how we can leverage data to the whole industry's advantage. And then the third thing would go back, I think, to the panel this morning, too, around AI and some of these technologies to see what are we really doing in an 1800s fashion that we need to be doing in a 2025 fashion.
This is like sitting in the middle of the table at Thanksgiving.
Can I have the gravy?
Well, given the level of disruption that we're experiencing now and the innovation and the technologies and all, and I look at how much is already in motion in the market, I'm inclined to look at the areas that are not in motion, or at least don't seem to be. So I'm going to speak to the when this one piece that seems to keep coming up of the promotion and tenure committees of faculty at universities and the current models, that's, to me, is one of the linchpins that's holding everything in place and in the way that we have it today, in terms of peer review flows, in terms of even the journals that faculty can publish in, to the point that it sometimes it almost distorts the literature within a particular discipline if it's not a large discipline, and certain content or content outlets are mandated. So when that really changes, and I think it's going to release the opportunity for a lot of these technologies to be used in ways that that we haven't seen them. And by then, I think that more of them will be better established for us to be able to see change. It's already accelerating. This year for me has been very, very different than even the last 5 years. So
You should write a post about that.
So I'm an active scholar. I do research and I publish, and I'm a scholar of the 18th century. So, kind of in response to Lisa's comment and Judy's, actually, I sort of think, there's a lot of this that's everything old is new again, in the sense of, I wish we could think in more than, month-long or year-long or even decades-long chunks, and think about what are the things that we really value and that we want to encourage and we want to nurture actually. And deep, thoughtful, reflective research is critically important. So what I'm looking for is the ways that this industry is taking advantage of and thinking about a humanistic perspective. For example, Safia Noble's work on Google is probably the most common parlance here, right? But there's lots of humanistic perspective on technology and industry and the things that we're trying to speed up and rationalize that, in fact, we should be slowing down. We should be thinking about slow scholarship in the way that we think about slow food. I know that slow is something nobody wants to talk about in publishing, but actually when we think about a more thoughtful and reflective approach to what we're producing and consuming, I think it's really valuable. And so I'm always looking for, where is that uptake going to be? That kind of perspective. And then the other thing I'm always keeping an eye on is the distance between researchers and what's happening in this industry. And at least in my field, that distance is only growing. If there's one thing I always tell folks to read in my field, it's that wonderful report by Chris Wickham and others on the rising metric tide, which just suggests the corrosive effects of metrics on a whole wide variety of disciplines and the way it reshaped expectations and production, really in ways that reduced, in many people's opinion, the value of what we were publishing as research because of this pressure to produce metrics that could be consumed in a particular way. So that distance between the research community's values and what we're doing in this industry is, I think, enormously important.
Let this be the place where we start the slow publishing movement. If we all left here and started promoting a slow publishing movement, just imagine we'd have like publishing trucks on the streets of Manhattan that say slow publishing on them. It'd be awesome. So, all right. So I want to thank the panelists today. We have a little bit of time if there are questions from the audience. I think Mary Beth left with the mic. Oh no, she's behind the. Sorry, I couldn't see you behind the pole. Okay, so raise your hand. Let her know that you want it, and fire questions at us. Tim.
One of the things I'm observing is this idea that there could be more value add to authors as part of a peer review process. But at the same time, if peer review is inexorably moving upstream, maybe that's moving away from society publishers. And if authors don't have independent funding and the money they'd use to pay for these value-add services is just the same money that's been used to pay for APCs, maybe there isn't actually any money there. So I'm just interested in people's observations. Is author services a real opportunity to generate money or just shifting the money around? And is there a risk that that might move away and upstream?
Personally, I don't think that author services and asking authors to pay for different levels of publisher service is the way to go. My fear is that they'll say, well, I don't want to pay for copy editing, and I'm the best writer in the world, because they're already telling us that when we say, hey, we're not charging you, and we're going to do all this copy editing. They're like, I don't need to be copy edited. So, and then I see all the kinds of errors and queries that copy editors, really smart questions like, did you really mean to use this math equation? Because it doesn't seem to make sense. Really important things that are being caught in that part of the process that I worry about sort of, when we kind of commoditize the parts of what we do, maybe left behind. Any other thoughts on that?
So like Karen, I actually just realized that I think the two of us are the two active sort of faculty who are on the Scholarly Kitchen. So I am also, publishing, although social sciences. I'm a journal editor as well of like what I like to call the bespoke model, because every issue of my journal is a special topics issue. So there's no continuous call for papers, all guest editors. The peer review process for each issue differs. It's crazy. Thinking about what I want as an author and what my authors want as editor, from me as an editor, typically it is not more process. So that's the other question I have about some of the things that I'm hearing about peer review moving upstream is like, maybe if that, taking away, I'm like ignoring your question about budget. taking away the question of the budget, like, are we actually proposing now to review everything, I think maybe up to 3 times? Or, because it's sounding additive to me, which I really don't feel like authors are looking for more times for their work to be reviewed. I think they're looking for their work to be reviewed definitively and like be published. But like one way or the other, right? The biggest thing they're irritated by, and I'm irritated by, is when I send in a manuscript. I mean, after 2.5 months, I'm happy if the rule is acceptance, but I'm actually even sometimes just relieved to get an answer, right? So I can move on. So I just think we need to, in addition to innovating in these different areas, I think we need to keep this big picture look on things of systems of like, is this actually service or is it additional services? And those might be different things.
I was just going to say, one thing that occurs to me as you're talking is that publishers in general, any type, need to keep in mind the problem that they're trying to solve from the user's perspective. And I think sometimes we all tend to be doing things that we think are neat or cool or should be helpful, and we haven't done the right amount of research or investigation to even see that this is something someone wants. So we wind up in an arms race with each other to do a whole bunch of stuff for authors that they don't even want. So I just think that's a really big caution that we have to keep that in mind. And I agree with you. I'm not sure that just layering on services onto things that are already there is ever going to be, a great revenue stream or even viable. And I think that maybe the thing to think about is helping them with different parts of their workflow where they actually have a real problem that they're trying to solve that's costing them money or costing them time.
Okay, go ahead, Karen.
Sorry, Angela. Just a very quick point that actually from our perspective, we think that APCs are unethical because in my field, people do not get funding to publish. And that APCs, first of all, would never cover the cost of publishing even a single article. It would be tens of thousands of dollars because of the labor that goes in, because a 10,000 or 12,000 word article requires such intensive, specialized work. And secondly, people don't have the money to do it, and it would exacerbate inequalities everywhere, essentially. So APCs know, and actually the American Historical Association has come out strongly on this. This isn't just me in my field of history, but also so for extra services, pricing for extra services would be, as we say, right out. So just saying.
Any other questions? Excellent. Well, I want to again thank my colleagues for joining this panel today, and I also want to thank SSP and the committee again for putting on this wonderful program for us, and would also like to take the opportunity to thank our sponsors, Cadmore Media, Ingenta, Web of Science Group, and Librios, and I hope everybody enjoyed it. I'm sure Melanie has some closing words, so I've said them all. Okay.
It's like you're the president or something.
I have a very limited window here to abuse my power, so I'm going to take it. And I think we get credit for finishing this on time.
Absolutely. Yes.
So thank you.
I really do think that Angela said it all, but a great round of appreciation for all of you and our speakers. And please grab a snack on the way out and enjoy your afternoon.
Great. Okay, guys, I want to get a